A potentially massive upset in Turkey is leaving the balance of power in the Middle East up in the air right now. The country will soon have a runoff election after longtime leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan failed to win 50% of the country's vote. He has been in power for 2 decades. Let's talk about what this means with international affairs expert and Biden White House advisor Harley Lippman up late with me tonight on the Final Five to talk about it. Harley, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about, first of all, Erdogan himself. He has been controversial. He is well known to be well disliked in many portions of the world here. Why is he so controversial?
Because his government represents somewhat of a hybrid between a democracy and an authoritarian regime. And it's a great question because on the one hand, they're in NATO, so they're our ally. In fact, they're the second largest military force in NATO outside the United States. And also, they're the guardians of the Bosphorus Straits, which is very strategically important for the United States. And it's widely believed that there are nuclear weapons, American nuclear weapons, that we have in Turkey, which is very important as a deterrence against Russia. So for those reasons, we want Turkey to be close to us. But they've been closer to Russia lately. While initially Erdogan helped Ukraine, he's getting closer and closer to Putin, helping Putin now. And he's seen as a radical Islamist by many people in this country. And so this is where you have the challenge of how to deal with him. He seems to play both sides very effectively.
So the runoff the runoff that will happen is because over the weekend, neither President Erdogan or the opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, I wanted to make sure I got as close to that as I possibly could.
You did very well. Yeah, known as KK in Turkey. So yes, they're called the opposition group is made up of 6 opposition parties. And why that's significant is that they used to fight more with each other than with Erdogan in previous elections. Now they decided that their mission is to defeat Erdogan. So they united and they're not criticizing each other. They're only criticizing Erdogan. So they represent a formidable force. That said, a lot of people thought that KK was going to win. He was gaining a lot of momentum, and Erdogan came out with almost 50% of the vote, and KK came out with almost 45% of the vote. So it surprised people because there was a devastating earthquake in Turkey with 50,000 people dying, and they felt that the Turkish government response was inadequate. Also, their building codes inspection were apparently not very good, and that was another source of problems. So there were, and this was in his home area, his district in Turkey, eastern Turkey, where his strength is. And yet the internal Turkey, meaning outside of major cities like Heartland America, if you will, they really have not voted much for the opposition. They still seem to be leaning towards Erdogan. So it's a wild card, but there is something quite interesting happening now. There is the potential role of a kingmaker in changing the outcome of the elections.
We know in the past when we've seen these high-profile elections overseas, in many cases you'll get a sense from the White House as to which they may not outright say we'd like to see so-and-so win, but you get the indication maybe sometimes by signals, by statements. President Biden was asked about this over the weekend, and he said to the extent of, I hope whoever wins, wins. Do you believe that reticence to pick a side here is based upon, as you mentioned, that whole idea that Turkey is, for all intents and purposes, part of that NATO alliance and still an ally, that regardless of who runs this country, we're still going to depend on them for some sort of protection, some sort of support there?
Yes, I think, the United States is going to work with whoever wins. I think, and the United States doesn't want to be seen as interfering in Turkey's elections.
Sure.
Already Erdogan got angry when the American ambassador went to make a visit to the opposition leader, KK, which is a traditional role of American ambassadors, but Erdogan got extremely angry at that. So that said, I think that the opposition party is clearly more pro-Western, wants to bring the country's economy back into a more, let's say, free market, more capitalistic way of implementing economic policies. And also, they're going to bring back democracy, which has been curbed under Erdogan. So clearly, the opposition would be better for the West.
We're going to see how this one plays out. What's the timeline for the runoff here? Is this going to be something that happens soon, or is there a long process between now and then?
It's 2 weeks from now.
Oh,
May
wow.
28th is D-Day. So they're going to have the election. What I mentioned earlier about the kingmaker, there is someone named Ogon who got about 5% of the vote. And whoever he sides with could tilt the election to that person. So it's up to KK and Erdogan to woo him to their side. He's a right-wing nationalist. And his two issues are he wants all the Syrian refugees in Turkey to be brought out of Turkey and back to Syria because apparently they're taking away jobs from Turks. And also he doesn't want to see the opposition party to be sympathetic with the Kurdish, which is a minority in Turkey and seen as a radical element by many people there. So remember, it's a right-wing nationalist party, but he's already laid out what he needs to have done if he supports KK. So the real issue here is whoever gets this guy on his side is likely to win.
You know, and again, one of those elections we've heard so much about Erdogan. We've seen a lot of protests involving him here in D.C., and clearly now this is crunch time for his administration there in Turkey. I have to leave it at that. Harley, Lippman, thanks for staying up late with us tonight. We really appreciate it here on The Final Five.
Thank you.
And The Final Five is back after this.